Harlem Swing Hearts. Part 1. The Echo of the Floorboards. The wooden floors of the Langston Hughes Community Center still creaked the same way they had in the summer of 1947. Back then, they'd groaned beneath hundreds of dancing feet, heels and Oxfords. Worn soles and polished boots swept across the room to the joyous chaos of swing. Big bands blared from battered speakers or played live from a corner stage. And the air would sizzle with sweat, perfume, and joy. Back then, Harlem was not just a place. It was a rhythm. Now, on a crisp spring afternoon in the year 2023, the room was quiet except for the sound of folding chairs being set up and laughter echoing faintly from the next room. Betty Mae Jenkins, 91 years old and still standing tall in her kitten heels, stepped through the doorway and let the memories rush her like a tide. She wore a lilac blouse, matching earrings, and a silk scarf around her silver curls. She walked with purpose and a cane that had seen more subway steps than most people her age even remembered. Her eyes, though slightly dulled by time, still held the fire of someone who once danced until sunrise and could steal a partner with one wink across the floor. The banner over the check-in table read, "Harlem Community Dance Week, swing back to life." She smiled. "I'm here to register for the Lindy Hop refresher," she told the young man at the table, who did a double take before offering a wide grin. "You danced Lindy back in the day?" Betty Mae gave a playful side eye. "Sugar, I was Lindy back in the day." As she stepped inside the hall, she scanned the space. Mirrors on one wall, a speaker playing faint Count Basie. Fresh varnish on the old floorboards. The soul of the place was intact. But she wasn't looking for the room. She was looking for him. She hadn't seen Earl Montgomery in 67 years. They were just 17 the last time they spun together. She remembered the night like a record that never stopped playing. Harlem was pulsing after the war. Big Joe Turner was on the radio. Earl wore his favorite suspenders. And she had on her green dress with the rhinestone brooch. They had danced until her ankles gave out. He kissed her under the lamppost outside the Savoy Ballroom. And the next morning, he was gone. Drafted. Korea. They wrote. Briefly. One letter. Then another. But life swelled in between like a tide neither of them could fight. She moved south for school. He stayed east. The rhythm faltered. And now, all these years later, there was a rumor that Earl, widowed, living uptown again, had signed up for this same Lindy Hop workshop. That he still wore two-tone shoes. That he still danced when the weather didn't make his knees cry. She hadn't come to chase ghosts. She came to see if one still breathed. The room slowly filled. People of all ages arrived. Teenagers in vintage suspenders. Women in 1950s skirts. A pair of middle-aged friends who looked half nervous, half delighted. Music grew louder, jumpin' at the woodside, and the energy picked up like spring wind catching the edge of an open coat. And then, he entered. Earl Montgomery. Tall, slightly stooped, with a fedora tipped back and a slow swagger that had aged. But not vanished. His skin was like dark bronze. And his salt and pepper mustache twitched slightly when he smiled. Their eyes met. No one else in the room existed. "Betty Mae Jenkins," he said, voice low and thick as molasses. "Earl Montgomery," she returned, lips trembling into a grin. He walked toward her slowly. "I figured if anyone still remembered this dance, it'd be you. I figured if anyone could still dip me without dropping me, it'd be you." He chuckled, deep and warm, no promises on the dropping part. They didn't embrace. Not yet. But there was a pull between them, gravitational. She could still feel the spin of their last dance echoing in the bones of the floor. And maybe even in the bones of her own hips. The instructor, a young woman named Lisette with braids wrapped in a golden scarf, clapped her hands. "Okay, folks, whether it's your first time or your 50th year swingin', let's start by just walking the beat. Find your partner. Feel the rhythm. This is about joy, not perfection." Betty Mae raised her brows at Earl. He extended his hand. "May I have this decade?" She took it. And together, they stepped into position. It started slow. The basic steps. The 6 count. Rock step. Triple step. Triple step. Her feet remembered before her brain did. His hand on her back was firm but light. He hadn't forgotten how to lead. They stumbled once, then laughed. By the 3rd track, they were turning. By the 5th, they were flying. The room around them blurred. A kaleidoscope of motion and giggles and joyful effort, but in the middle, Betty Mae and Earl found a groove that hadn't rusted, just rested. When the music slowed, breathless applause followed. Younger dancers clapped in admiration. Lisette cheered. "Show us how it's done." Elders. Earl bowed slightly. Betty curtsied, more wobble than grace, but full of charm. Later, as the room emptied out and the last notes of "In the Mood" faded, they sat on a bench by the window, sipping lemon water. "I almost didn't come," Earl admitted. "I almost didn't believe you'd still be standing." "Betty," he said, gently, "I never stopped thinking about that green dress and your crooked brooch." She smiled. "I still have it, you know." His hand slid over hers. "Then let's not wait another 60 years to dance again." Outside, Harlem buzzed as always, its jazz still humming beneath pavement and neon. Inside, in a quiet room with old floors and new beginnings, two hearts beat once more in time. Together. Part 2. Where the music waited. Sunday in Harlem always felt like something sacred, not just because of the churches that lined Lenox Avenue like stitched pearls, but because of the way light poured between brownstones, and how the scent of frying fish or sweet potato pie could wrap around you like home. Betty Mae stood outside what used to be the Savoy Ballroom, now a modern apartment building with glass railings and polished signage that tried, half-heartedly, to honor the history beneath. There was a plaque, bronze, quiet. On this site from 1926 to 1958 stood the Savoy Ballroom, the home of Happy Feet. She ran her fingers over the cold metal, her other hand resting on Earl's arm. "It was magic," she whispered. "Do you remember the floor? It bounced, like it wanted us to dance." Earl nodded slowly. "I remember your heels scuffing in rhythm like a heartbeat. I remember the horn section sweating in the back. I remember thinking, if I never danced again, I'd be all right. Because I'd already flown." They didn't cry. Not then. Instead, they did something bolder. They danced. Right there on the sidewalk. No music but memory. Betty leaned into Earl, and they rocked gently, no fancy footwork. Just the quiet sway of two people reclaiming space. Passers-by slowed. A man across the street took off his headphones. Someone clapped. Just once. Earl grinned. Still got it. Betty Mae winked. Still never had to fake it. Afterward, they walked down 135th Street, stopping at every place that used to be something. Minton's Playhouse, now a jazz bar with craft cocktails and Edison bulbs. The former Lafayette Theater, now a discount clothing store. And the old building that once held rent parties where the rent was paid in rhythm and the neighbors kept beat with spoons on tables. They sat in a quiet cafe near Marcus Garvey Park. The menu was all lattes and turmeric chai, but the walls were lined with framed black and white photos of Langston Hughes, Ella Fitzgerald, Josephine Baker. Betty's gaze paused at one of the photos, young dancers airborne, arms flung, skirts catching flight mid-twist. "That was us," she said. Earl followed her eyes. "That is us." Over slices of lemon cake. They talked about what happened after the music paused. Earl had married once, a quiet woman who worked in the school system. Marlene couldn't dance a lick, he admitted, but she made a mean gumbo and laughed like a snare drum. Betty smiled. Harold was a trumpet player. Jazz, mostly. Always thought in solos. I loved him, I really did, but he never quite danced with me, just around me. They were quiet for a while. "I don't believe in one love," Earl said softly. "I believe in many, but only a few know how to last in your bones." Betty reached across the table, took his hand. "Then let's let this one dance a while." That evening, back at the community center, they arrived early for the open floor session. Lisette was already warming up a playlist, modern swing remixes mixed with the old school beats. "You two coming back for more?" she asked. Beaming, Betty Mae tapped her cane with flair. "We don't call it a comeback, baby, we call it an encore." The music started. Shiny stockings. Betty stepped into Earl's arms. The tempo wasn't fast, but it was alive. Their steps were smaller now, more intentional, but they carried the same spirit. And this time, as they spun and dipped gently, Betty resting her head against his chest, the younger dancers stopped and watched. Not with pity, not with awe, with respect, because what they witnessed was not nostalgia. It was presence. Two elders who remembered when jazz wasn't retro, when swing was revolution, and when dancing was how you said everything you were too afraid to speak. The room burst into applause as the song ended. Lisette ran over. "Do you two realize you just did the entire routine from Whitey's Lindy Hoppers?" Betty blinked. "Child, I was a Whitey girl. Back row, left corner. Used to practice with Norma Miller herself." Gasps, smiles, whispers. Lisette turned to the class. "Y'all, we're not just dancing history here. We're dancing with it." Later that night, as they walked slowly through a Harlem glowing with twilight, Earl paused. "Do you think we missed our moment?" he asked. Betty looked up at him, her eyes full of swing and sorrow and silver-lined grace. "No," she said, "I think we paused. And now, the band's just starting the second set. Final part. Curtain call at the Apollo." When the invitation arrived, it came printed on thick ivory cardstock with gold-embossed letters. Harlem Arts Festival 2023. Honoring the legacy of the Lindy Hop. Special tribute. Legends Who Still Leap. Featuring Ms. Betty Mae Jenkins and Mr. Earl Montgomery. Betty Mae stared at the card for a full minute before she spoke. "They're asking us to perform." Earl chuckled, holding his reading glasses up to the light. "No, they're asking us to remind the world how it used to feel when a floor bounced." She grinned. "Lord help us if my hip forgets to keep up." The night of the performance, the Apollo Theater pulsed with life. The red marquee outside glowed against the Harlem sky like a flame rekindled. Inside, the crowd buzzed, young swing dancers, jazz lovers, elders in their Sunday best, and tourists who barely knew the difference between Balboa and boogie-woogie, but could feel that something sacred was about to unfold. Backstage, the lights hummed. Betty stood at the mirror, adjusting her green dress, the same one she wore the night she and Earl first kissed outside the Savoy. She'd had it let out at the waist, and the rhinestone brooch had lost a few stones. But when she looked in the mirror, she saw her again, the girl who flew. Beside her, Earl was lacing up his two-tone shoes. He wore a crisp suit, navy blue, with a boutonniere of white gardenia, Betty's favorite. He looked at her through the mirror. "You ready?" She took a breath. "My knees aren't." He smiled. "Then we'll just dance with our hearts." The curtain rose. The band struck up the first few notes of "It Don't Mean a Thing If It Ain't Got That Swing," and the audience erupted in cheers. Betty and Earl stepped into the spotlight. For a beat, there was silence, awe, a collective inhale. Then, the music hit. And they danced. Not like they did in 1947. Not like they ever could again. They danced as they were now, 91 and 94. Bones older, breaths shorter, but every step soaked in soul. The crowd didn't see age. They saw rhythm made visible. They saw stories told in triple steps and rockbacks. They saw joy unfiltered by youth, sharpened instead by memory and defiance. When Earl spun her gently and caught her just right, the audience rose. And when Betty leaned into the final pose, back curved, hand in his, eyes shining like melted brass, the crowd exploded. A standing ovation. Tears. Applause that felt like thunder. Earl whispered in her ear, voice trembling, "That was better than our first." She smiled, "Because now we know what every beat costs, and why it's worth it." The next day, their photo appeared in the New York Times under the headline, "Legends Leap Again. Harlem's Lindy icons steal the stage." But they didn't care about the press. What mattered was the letter they received from a teenage dancer in Chicago. "I almost gave up dancing. Said it was too hard. Then I saw you too. Now I know I've got time. Thank you for proving that swing never dies." Betty pinned it beside her mirror. Earl brought her coffee every Wednesday after dance class. They didn't marry. They didn't move in together. They didn't need to. Instead, they danced. Every chance they got, on sidewalks, in classrooms, at parks, even once in the frozen food aisle of the local grocery store when Ella Fitzgerald came on overhead. And every time, people smiled, phones came out, applause echoed, but most of all, hearts opened, because in a world that often forgets its roots, they reminded us that history isn't something you leave behind. It's something you carry in your feet.